So this is sort of the basics here of working with a live paint object. Let's go a little bit further. What if I want to manipulate my strokes? At this point, I'm only manipulating fills. So over in my toolbox, what I'll do is I'll double click on my live paint bucket tool. That gives me my live paint bucket options. And inside my options area here, I have paint fills, which is already turned on. Then I also have paint strokes. I'm going to turn that guy on as well. And there's where the swatch preview is coming from. Keep this guy turned on if you want to see those little tiny color swatches beside your cursor. And while we're in this dialog box, I'll also point out the highlight color that's being used whenever I hover over top of a fillable area. Okay, so I turned on paint strokes. I'm going to click on OK. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'll go and switch to my stroke inside my toolbox. And what I want to do is set a different stroke color and also a different stroke weight. So you can use whatever settings you want. I'll set my stroke up on my control bar here. I'll knock that down maybe to 5 points. And I'll use maybe a red here. Now, here's how it works. Whenever I hover over top of a shape, I get the paint bucket. Whenever I hover over top of a path, I get a paint brush. See how that works there? So I could come in here, for example, and single click right on this path here. See how Illustrator is considering all of this one single path. In other words, where the shapes intersect, Illustrator is breaking these shapes or almost cutting them into different pieces. Well, sort of. That's not exactly how it's working, but at least that's how it's behaving at this point. So I'm going to come along here and click on each of these paths, whichever paths I want to change color here. I'm just coming along here and setting these up. Maybe something like this. Whenever I get that brush there. However, I have to be honest, this is not really the way that I like to work. It's kind of tricky. You have to be pretty precise. What if you accidentally move your cursor off just a bit, but you were intending to hit a path? Well, let me show you a bit of a trick here. I'm going to go back to my live paint bucket tool, and I'll double click on it to go back inside my options dialog box, and I'm going to uncheck paint strokes. And then click on OK. Now you might be thinking, hey, wait a minute, we still want to paint strokes. Well, we do, but check this out. Rather than having that option turned on, of course, now when I hover over top of a path, nothing happens. I still get my paint bucket there. But check this out. I'm going to hold down Shift. And by holding down Shift, that toggles me to the paintbrush. So you can see right now I have the paintbrush with the X in the middle. That means I can't click, I can't set a stroke on a fill here, but I could hover over top of a stroke and single click here to set that stroke. So I'm just holding down Shift here and clicking on each of these strokes. There it is there. I let go of Shift and I'm back on my paint bucket tool. So that's how I like to work. I keep that stroke turned off in the options dialog box, and then I just use Shift whenever I want to come along and set a stroke here. Something like this. I'm going to undo that last step there, but that's how it works. So hopefully you're having some fun here. Now here's the weird, trippy part. I'm going to go and grab my black arrow tool, and you can see that Illustrator grabs my entire object. I'll just get my swatches out of the way here. You can see Illustrator grabs my entire object here. We'll talk about this mode, if you will, in just a moment, but go ahead and grab your white arrow tool. And I'm just going to deselect everything and then click back on one of my shapes. Here's the wacky, trippy part. I can move this shape around. See what's happening there? Isn't that weird? You know what it reminds me of? If you've ever worked with the shapes inside Flash, it's exactly the same concept. So overlapping shapes, overlapping objects tend to cut each other out. Well, that's sort of the same idea here, except they're not permanent cuts like they would be, say, in Flash. They're more temporary cuts, or preview cuts, if you will. Speaking of preview, I'm going to go into my outline mode here, Control-Y, Command-Y on the Mac. And there's what Illustrator is seeing, just these regular plain old rectangles that we had started with. I'll go back into my preview mode, Control-Y, Command-Y. So that's what Illustrator is seeing, is just these regular old objects, and I'm getting this live paint on top of these objects wherever they overlap and intersect. So it's kind of a cool concept.